think I've met everyone here, but my name is Carolyn Finch, the new program manager for the Charleston Digital Corridor. I just wanted to welcome you all, and for our non-members, glad you got to see this space, and you're welcome to contact me if you want more information. We'd love to have you here. I'll be brief. You guys didn't come to see me or hear me talk. You came for John. He is at Fish Labs next door at FS2, and he's here today to talk about cybersecurity. How long have you been over at FS2? You started in the flagship.
We actually started here in the flagship building and then outgrew that space, moved next door to FS2, and now we're busting at the seams over there. So we've been involved with the digital quarter about 3 years now.
Yeah, that's the stories we like to hear. So everyone just welcome and thank you to John. And we haven't completely decided on our July schedule yet, but we'll keep you posted. We might be doing a portion on the new healthcare reform and how it's going to affect businesses. So kind of relevant. Yeah. All right. Thank you, John.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. John LaCour, CEO, founder of Fish Labs, and going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity today. And in particular, going to talk about what I call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and cybersecurity fact versus fiction. So going to also give you guys just a little bit of background about Fish Labs, and also just talk about, what are some of the real world threats that are out there. What are the ones that you need to be worried about? Perhaps the ones that you don't need to be worried about as much. And also want to keep this interactive. I think there's a lot of technical people here. And so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt, and we can drill down on anything that's of interest to you. So just a little bit about Fish Labs. We provide cybercrime protection and intelligence services to financial services, e-commerce companies, and other businesses that operate online. And we help them defend their networks and their customers from attacks like phishing, malware, denial of service attacks, and other online threats. We're based here in Charleston, but we have staff in 4 countries now. We're growing like crazy, so if anyone looking for work, please send them our way. We operate a 24/7, 365 security operations center. And that team operates around the clock to protect our clients. And currently we're handling roughly 50,000 incidents per year. And, I wish I could say we had tens of thousands of clients. We're not there yet. Hopefully we will be. So we have some clients that have, over 10,000 incidents a year in a few cases. So what's FUD, right? I'm not here to talk about ham-like products, right? Not cat FUD food, maybe, I don't know. So we're going to talk about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? So there's a lot of hype out there in the media, in the newspapers. They never really said exactly which virus it was. I'm still waiting for that bit of information. But it seems like there's a lot of media out there that's trying to scare us, right? So these are the sort of stories we see every day. This is from actually a couple days ago, 8 charged in U.S. over cyber crime ring. And it happens all the time. Anyone heard of this incident? Right? Anyone know anyone who's had their identity stolen as a result of this incident? Probably not, right? The movies industry is involved in this scheme as well. Anyone see this movie, Firewall, with Harrison Ford? This is probably one of his best pictures, right ahead of Indiana Jones and some of those other ones, right? So, great flick, highly recommend it, right? And the movie industry has gone over the top when The Onion comes out with this great news story about, the fast-talking computer hacker who just has to break the encryption and upload the nanovirus. And you probably can't see it here, but it says, a cipher has to break in moments before cracking into the mainframe. I'm in, all right? So what's going on out there? So all of this hyperbole from the media, from the entertainment industry, creates all this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and it becomes difficult to tell what's worth really worrying about. And as a result, there's a lot of myths out there. And so I'm just going to start out and knock some of these, clear some of these things up straight away. So here's the myth. A lot of people worry about their ATM or debit card being stolen or compromised in some way. But the reality is, if you have any fraudulent transactions, as a consumer, keyword consumer, you're not liable. In, I think it was 1978, Congress passed the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, and there's a section in there known as Regulation E, and it has clear guidelines about consumer rights with regard to various financial transactions, and it makes it clear if you have unauthorized transactions on your account, you're not liable, and the bank has to make you whole. So bottom line is, you don't have anything to worry about there. It's nothing to be panicked about, to be hyper vigilant about. It's probably a good idea as us being good citizens to not be stupid about it, because all of our bank rates go up if there's a lot of fraud, and we end up paying for it that way. But it's not something to be overly concerned about. Similarly, the same sort of rules apply for credit card transactions. So at least in the US, the credit card companies have a policy of basically making your account whole if there's any problems with fraud. It used to be you're responsible for $50. Now, pretty much everyone, it's $0. So the only requirement is that you have to report the fraud promptly, and then the company will make you whole. Let's see. Another one that I kind of hear a lot from industry and media is there's a perception that hackers are targeting specific people. If you get a virus, it's because the bad guys came after you. If your computer gets hacked, it's because the bad guys came after you. All right, so let me just do a caveat. That happens in a very, very, very small percentage of cases. But for the most part, hackers are opportunistic. They're looking for any vulnerable site they can find. They're looking for anybody that they can infect. And generally speaking, they cast a wide net. They distribute malware and phishing and have vulnerability scanners that scan or attempt to attack large numbers of users. So generally speaking, unless you are a government entity, maybe an NGO, maybe a defense contractor, you generally don't have to worry about being specifically targeted. Right? This is a fun one. Macs are more secure than PCs. A lot of people have that perception. And there's a lot of nuances to this. So for you technical people, there's arguments can be made either way about this. But generally speaking, Macs are not more secure than PCs. It just happens that PCs have a larger market share. That's starting to change. They're more ubiquitous. So the hackers, again, being opportunistic, are developing malware and exploits and attacks to target Windows because simply there's more Windows machines and they're more likely to compromise the system that way. And we have seen as the Mac OS platforms become more popular, as smartphones are becoming more popular, more attacks, malware are being developed for those systems. So if you follow electronic trends and internet user trends and things like that, there's a lot of people who publish graphs showing that more people on a global basis will be using mobile devices to access the internet than desktop systems. So eventually I imagine we'll see mobile malware overtake desktop malware. I think that on an optimistic view, maybe that won't happen because we may have learned some of the lessons that we learned in the Windows world, and there'll be better defenses and the policies that Apple has, for example, to review apps before releasing them will mitigate that to some degree. If I keep my antivirus software up to date, I won't get infected. So this is another one where we could go into a lot of nuance here. Generally speaking, you can't rely on your antivirus software alone to protect you. The miscreants, the cyber criminals, the attackers are constantly generating thousands of malware programs every day. And to get more technical on it, a lot of times it's the same program, repackaged multiple different ways to try to get around antivirus detection methods. So antivirus software is pretty good at blocking everything more than between a few days old and a week old. But it's not going to protect you against what's coming out today. And there'll be thousands of pieces of new malware that are coming out today, right? So you need to do more than that. Still useful, but you need to do more. So what should you do? We're going to get into that, but to set that up, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of cybercrime, and then we'll talk a little bit about evaluating risk in the context of where we are today with cybercrime. So, when the internet was just first starting out as a DARPA project and computer networks were just starting to happen, it was a very small group of computer scientists, technology developers that were using the systems. And some of the first hacking incidents, if you want to call them that, were really spawned out of intellectual curiosity to see what was possible. And in fact, to a lot of the old school technology people, connotation of hacker is a positive and not a negative because of that intellectual curiosity. So, and that's been going on for a long time. It's still going on today, but there's a lot other motivations that are present today. We'll get into that. But just some examples. In 1986, one of the first viruses was the brain virus. Anybody know where that originated from? Offhand? There's two Pakistani brothers, computer programmers, assembly language programmers, were trying to see what they could do, and they came up with the brain virus, and it rapidly spread around the world primarily through diskette sharing. Robert Morris Jr. released a worm in 1988. It was one of the first worms on the internet, and that was primarily driven by intellectual curiosity. It got out of hand, overwhelmed a large number of Unix systems on the internet, and it's interesting that his father worked for the NSA at the time, which is one of the more spectacular notes of that instance. And also what's kind of started up maybe in the early 80s and onward is theft of services, and that still happens a lot today. And one of the more notorious events were the so-called green card lottery spammers. Anyone familiar with that by chance? So this is when the internet was just starting to take off. People were starting to use email a lot. Something called Usenet, news groups was very popular. And these enterprising attorneys thought, we can use the internet to drum up a lot of business. So they sent out massive amounts of messages saying, hey, we're attorneys, there's a green card lottery coming up, let us basically submit your application for you for special one-time low fee or whatever. They spammed this out, it clogged up the internet, and this was really the first documented case on a massive level of spam on the internet. Well, the world's changed a little bit. It's gotten nastier. Now we have cybercrime for profit. Some of the first phishing web pages appeared around 2000, and they're still very common today. We deal with, again, thousands of them every day on behalf of our clients. Something called the Zeus banking Trojan came out in 2007. It's morphed over time. It's still present. Current versions are called Game Over, Citadel. There's a version called Jabberzeus. And this is a specific piece of malware that is designed to hook into your web browser, monitor when you visit an online banking site, steal your login information, and pass that information back to the attackers. So that's the simple version. The really advanced versions actually have features where the attackers can connect into your computer and use your computer to log into the bank site. So when the bank's saying, okay, what IP address logged in? Well, this looks normal. This guy always logs in from here. They don't see anything different. So the threats are evolving dramatically, and cybercrime for profit is really a huge problem. Another type of attack or motivation is what's been referred to as hacktivism. So you can think of this as digital protest. One of the more nefarious groups is a so-called anonymous group, which isn't really a group, but people who tend to rally around kind of common tactics and methods. Some of the Occupy Wall Street protest went from the kinetic world or the physical world with sitting out in front of Wall Street offices to actions online. And we've seen Syrian activists get involved in recent weeks, attack targets. So there's a lot more of this sort of activity that's going on today as well. And then the really fun, nasty stuff that probably has been going on for longer than we know about it, but it's become more visible in some sense, is state-sponsored cybercrime. And you can really kind of break this down into two subclasses, if you will, and probably the more prevalent is state-sponsored or affiliated espionage. And so this is really attacks on businesses for business information that can be used to steal intellectual property, such as source code, know-how, plans, CAD drawings, theft of IP that can then be delivered to companies in their own country to give them a competitive advantage, right? Why should I spend $5 million over a year investing and developing something when I can go steal it for maybe $50,000? And then we're also hearing more of, you might think of as cyber attacks. And so the Stuxnet worm was unleashed upon Iran and their nuclear facilities. And if you read all the media reports, supposedly it was developed jointly by the US and Israel. And then in this year, September of this year, and we've been involved in this, a group calling themselves the Qassam Cyber Fighters launched Operation Ababel. And this is a series of denial of service attacks against large US banks. And essentially what these guys are doing is compromising thousands of websites, installing backdoors on them, and using those backdoors to generate network traffic at the bank websites. And in some cases, some of these attacks have exceeded over 150 gigabits per second of data. And so when that happens, it knocks over the website. The banks have gotten a lot better about responding to that. It's not as much of a problem. Their defenses are better, but that remains a threat. Right, so we kind of look at these different motivations and who they're targeting. It varies quite a bit. So you have, theft of services. So these are ISPs, telcos, email providers, websites, and often the attackers are targeting these companies so that they can use their resources in furtherance of additional attacks. Right, they want to be invisible. So I don't want to use my home IP to attack. I'm going to attack an ISP, get into their system, and then launch my attack from there. So it adds a layer of obfuscation, makes it harder to trace. Money theft. So this is individuals and businesses. So this is you and me. There's a small business. This is large business. We'll talk some more about that. Hacktivism, political activism, government, NGOs, companies that are typically targeted by activists. So this might be financial organizations targeted by the Operation Wall Street folks. It might be Cargill being targeted by anti-GMO activists, for example. It really runs the gamut. Financial espionage. So again, this is looking for theft of intellectual property, typically. Nation-state aggression, critical infrastructures. This is your utilities. This is your financial systems. Could be air traffic control, transportation. A lot of these attacks recently by either directly by nation states or sponsored by nation states have been targeting critical infrastructure. The company in Saudi Arabia called Aramco, which is a large gas producer, was targeted by what's believed to be nation state aggressors. A number of companies in South Korea woke up to a virus one day that targeted banks and other companies, wiped out, I think something like 3,000 computers wouldn't boot up that day after having been compromised and infected. And then intelligence gathering. So this is typically your defense contractors, government, and other vendors that are working with government typically. Anybody fall into any of these categories in here? So I'm guessing you got to, right? Because you're a target. So let's talk more about that. So let's look at some real world examples. We do a lot with phishing, so I'm going to show some examples of phishing sites. And if you see any particular company names up here, it's not an indication that that company is more vulnerable or less vulnerable. It's just I happen to have a screenshot of an attack targeting them from some point in time. So this is a phishing page targeting Chase Bank. And if you look carefully at the URL, you see it's not chase.com that's up there, but it looks exactly like a Chase Bank login. This happens every day. We detect about 1,500 phishing pages similar to this every single day. Another example, online gaming. This is a phishing site for Battle.net, right? So I don't know if there's any gamers in here, but Battle.net, and there's a ton more. Zigna has a bunch of games that get phished. A bunch of other companies do as well. Any guesses what they're phishing for? Right? The bank's pretty obvious. If you get somebody's credential, you might be able to get money out of their account. Guesses. So what the hackers are doing with Battle.net is they will compromise someone's Battle.net user account, take it over, and then they go sell their virtual goods. So in a lot of these games, you play the games for a long time, you get special swords and shields and gold and all kinds of virtual goods, and they have real value. And so these guys take over accounts. They go on eBay. You can go on eBay today and look, and you can buy Battle.net swords and shields, and you can buy Zigna poker chips, and you can buy things from Second Life and all these online games, right? I heard someone say, Second Life, how about get a First Life? I don't know. All right, Amazon.com. So how does this work? A lot of people have Amazon.com accounts. They have their credit card information saved. Their account gets compromised. You can log in, order stuff, have it shipped. So what the enterprising bad guys do is they go on eBay and they sell stuff they don't have. So they go on eBay and they sell unlocked, iPhone 5, 64 gig, whatever. Wait for somebody to buy it at a special low price. Then they go on Amazon with their compromised Amazon account. They order it, but have it drop shipped to the guy who bought it on eBay. So they get paid by this guy who thinks he bought something on eBay. The guy on eBay gets this product, so he doesn't complain, right? And so in the end, the guy whose Amazon account is the guy who gets in trouble. But again, he doesn't get in trouble because his credit card company says, oh, it's fraud. You're not liable for it. So Amazon gets paid. The credit card company basically eats it, the issuing bank to be more precise, and all of us pay for it through higher credit card interest rates. DirectGov. I didn't hear any English accents, but DirectGov is a UK government website that's used to disperse financial aid to university students. And so one of the things you do when you apply for financial aid with the UK government is you log into DirectGov, you give them your bank account information, and the government wires that money basically into your account. So, the enterprising bad guys have come up with a nice scheme where they'll compromise these DirectGov accounts. They'll log in, but they'll use their own bank account information and say, yes, I'm the student. Please send me my funds. Here's my bank account information in the Ukraine or Romania or whatever. And the government sends those funds. I'm sure they don't send it overseas, but they'll use UK bank accounts to do that. So there's a lot of ways to monetize these accounts that may be not obvious. Western Union is a money transfer site. You can go into almost tons of convenience stores. A lot of grocery stores provide services through Western Union or MoneyGram, but you can also send money through Western Union by logging onto their website. So the bad guys are trying to compromise these Western Union accounts so they can send money. It helps them also launder money. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use third parties that receive funds and then send them on via Western Union. And Western Union is not traceable. You don't have to have any proof of identity to use Western Union. You just need a passcode basically to pick up money. AOL. You've got mail. All right. So a couple reasons that AOL might get targeted. So a lot of these scams start out with spam. So in order to be able to launch your scam, you need a way to send out emails. So one way is to compromise existing email accounts at AOL or other providers. But AOL has an interesting feature that's different from most service providers. If you install the AOL client software and use it to access the service, and then you connect out to the internet, you're actually connecting out through AOL's network. And so from your home computer, a VPN tunnel is created to AOL's system, and then you go out through AOL. So the bad guys have realized this, and so AOL accounts are valuable to them because they can use it as a way to hide their connection. They can install that AOL software, tunnel to AOL system, connect out to the internet, do whatever cyber crimes they want to do, And when those cybercrimes get investigated, it traces back to AOL. All right, maybe law enforcement, subpoenas AOL and figures out which AOL account it is, but it's compromised, and there's not much more they can do. Hotmail. I don't know what Microsoft calls this anymore. Hotmail, Windows Live, Outlook.com. Same thing. They're using this to send out spam largely. One of the other interesting attacks that's popped up in recent days around email account compromise is that the hackers are looking to compromise webmail accounts, Hotmail, Yahoo Webmail. They log into those accounts, they look through the sent messages and see if that person communicates via email with a broker or account manager looking for high net worth individuals. When they find that, they'll then send an email as the victim to the banker and say, I got stuck on business out of emergency happened. I got sick in the hospital on my trip to Moscow. I need you to wire me some funds, right? And so the banker receives that message, and from the banker, it's the email address that they've always received emails from. And in some cases, we've had bankers who would act on those instructions. They're used to dealing with their client. They know them personally. They see an email address that they're used to working with. They don't think twice about it. And most of the banks we've talked to said our policy is bankers should never take instruction based on an email alone. They need to follow up with a phone call to validate it, but some bankers, they're human beings, they make mistakes, they're lazy, they don't follow policy. Facebook. This is another one where it's difficult to monetize Facebook directly, right? But attackers are able to leverage this to send out their scams to other users. So if they compromise your Facebook account, they may send out a posting or message to everyone that you're friendly with that says, click this link, right? And if and your friends see that it's coming from you, they're going to trust it. So this must really be a funny video because my friend sent it to me, they follow it, and it may lead to a virus or something like that. Shipping companies, we see FedEx targeted and phishing accounts. So in a lot of these scams, if they steal credit cards or they compromise Amazon accounts, they need some way to ship the product. So they'll compromise FedEx or UPS or DHL accounts and use those accounts to generate shipping labels. Match.com. Should I ask who's using Match.com? See if maybe we'll admit to it. Okay. This is a kind of low-level scam, but the bad guys will take over an account and then use it to correspond with people. And basically, what has happened? It's sad to say, but people have developed online virtual relationships with people, or who they think people are. And then the next thing you know, the person that they've developed this online relationship with sends them an email and says, hey, I'm in the hospital. Is there anything you can do to give me some money? Or I'm stranded somewhere and I need some money to buy a plane ticket. And they get tricked that way. All right, so let's change it up. Those are a lot of attacks, primarily on consumers. There's another threat. The computer industry likes to come up with these really colorful names for all these different scams. And so someone took phishing and said, well, what about phishing attacks that are targeting executives or bigwigs or high net worth people? Let's call that whaling. So this is an example of a whaling attack on an executive that we were involved in this case. And in this instance, a fake IRS notice was sent, right? And this would lead to malware and being infected. This wasn't sent out broadly. It was sent to one or two people. Looks very legitimate, but if your PDF reader is not patched to the latest version and you open this, it's going to infect your computer. Advanced persistent threats. So this is another term that the industry's come up with, and sometimes just called APTs. And you probably read about attacks from China. This is typically what these groups in China are doing, and they're targeting government contractors, companies that work with the government. In one case, the security firm RSA was hit, and the reason that they were hit was because Lockheed Martin was using their security technology to protect passwords. And so in order to hack Lockheed Martin, they needed to hack the security technology. So to hack the security technology, they needed to hack RSA. So they used one of these APT threats where they send a very targeted email message. In the case of RSA, they sent a Excel spreadsheet document that said something like, here's our latest information report on our business, something along those lines. The Excel document was crafted a special way where if your Excel software wasn't the latest version, it would drop a virus on your computer system. So they hacked into RSA, got the decryption keys for the security tokens, used that to hack into Lockheed Martin, and presumably steal information from Lockheed Martin. Malware. So I got this one in my mailbox. I don't know why the Federal Reserve was emailing me. You know, I like to think I'm special, but maybe not that special, right? So here's a fake email saying the outgoing wire you sent was canceled. So here's the bad guys that are really trying to target your CFO, your controller, your accounts payable people to compromise them with malware. So the average user is probably going to look at that and say, there's no reason for the Federal Reserve to email me. Some average users would still click the links anyway, right? But if you work in finance, it's plausible that someone, and your job is to send out wire transfers, it's plausible that you might get an email telling you there's a problem with the wire transfer, right? So it's targeted in that sense. But if you click those links, what happens is you end up visiting a certain type of web page called an exploit kit. And what the exploit kit does is it determines what type of web browser you have, what plugins you have. Do you have Flash? Do you have Java? Do you have PDF readers? ActiveX controls for Internet Explorer, other things. And the exploit kit uses some logic to figure out what browser you have and what plugins you have, and then it sends you specially crafted attacks based on that. And these are sold on the underground. So some smart guys that typically live in countries that have a really good education system but really poor job opportunities. So they turn their skills over for doing evil instead of good and develop these exploit kits and sell them on the underground for $1,000, maybe, sometimes more, sometimes less, right? So all of this is a little bit dated, but all of these exploit kits collectively target 74 different browser and browser plugin vulnerabilities, right? So you have to be really vigilant about keeping your browser and browser plugins up to date. So here's an example from the Eleanor exploit kit, and this is what the bad guys see. They have a whole control panel, web application control panel. They get stats on how many people visited, how many got compromised. So 10% of people that visited got compromised in this case. And here's the distribution of the operating systems that visited. So they're pretty robust systems. There's a whole ecosystem of attackers, guys developing the exploit kits, guys developing the malware, guys renting out access to exploit kits, guys who specialize in money laundering. They're all specialized. All right, so what should we do? Should we just close the blind, bury our computer, go home, give up? I always joke that, in our product planning meetings and stuff, we can do this, this, and this, and this, or we can just quit and become landscapers or something. Sometimes it's appealing. Well, let's talk about how to evaluate risk, right? That's what we're here to do, is figure out what do I really need to be worried about and what can I ignore. So risk, the kind of fundamental definition is it's the impact of an event, how much damage it does, times the probability of an event. That's the risk. And so security is the process of lowering that risk by implementing countermeasures that cost less than the risk itself, right? That's when it makes sense to implement countermeasures. Now this is often clouded. Perceived security risk does not equal security reality. So there's a number of things that kind of cloud our ability to evaluate both the likelihood and the impact. And so Bruce Schneier, who's a well-known security expert, has a book called Beyond Fear, and he has an essay about the psychology of security. He identifies kind of these 5 points. One is that people exaggerate the spectacular but rare risk. They downplay common risk. Right? People have trouble estimating risk for anything that is not normal. So people have the inability to predict the unknown. I mean, that's kind of obvious when you state it. I was at a conference a few days ago and with some bankers, and we're talking about security and stuff like that. They were talking about this really innovative bank. It was one of the first banks to put handicap ramps in at all their branches. And they're really proud of that, right? They're also the first bank to get robbed by a guy in a wheelchair. Right? So they didn't anticipate that. Personified risks are greater than anonymous risk, right? So everyone has a tendency to think, well, not going to happen here, or I don't know anyone that's happened to until it does happen to you. People also underestimate risk that they willingly take and overestimate risk in situations that they can't control. Right? So there's a lot of things that we do every day where we just accept the risk. Right? Maybe, I don't know if hopefully everyone's really good about wearing their seatbelt 100% of the time. Of course, not everybody does, but they accept that risk. But they don't open the door of their car and evaluate, am I going to accept the risk of not wearing a seatbelt or not? No, they just don't. And then also this kind of touches back on the media, right? So people overestimate risks that are being talked about, that are going to be in the spotlight, right? So probably a lot of people are freaked out about hacking from China. So, unless you're a DoD contractor, you are a government organization, an NGO, you're probably not going to get hacked by the Chinese. Here's a kind of interesting example, and we could talk about this, but I remember a few years ago, there was a lot of talk here locally about a bond measure to raise money to basically update school buildings to make them earthquake-proof, right? So I think, I haven't done the research to know what the probability of an earthquake is here and looked at the structural reports on the schools, but I think this is an example where perhaps, based on the scientific data, the cost of fixing the schools may not be worth the cost of what happens if we do have an earthquake. So just think about when are people in school? Well, they're not in school in the summer. They're not in school at the night. So there has to be people there. They have to be standing next to schools that are not being built well. It has to be a big enough earthquake. There's all these things that, statistically speaking, are not super likely. But the bond measure passed and the schools are being fixed. And the reason why is because there's kind of this other implicit element in evaluating risk, and that's what I call the moral outrage. And so there's some things that, even though, from a strictly probability standpoint, are extremely unlikely, that are just unacceptable to society. And so we mitigate those risks anyway. And so that's something you have to think about. All right. So what to do? I'm going to kind of knock out some of these. Here's the low-hanging fruit that if you do these things will substantially improve your security. It doesn't cost a lot. Right? So your PC will become infected. If it hasn't already, it will become, or in your company, you'll have infected PCs. So keep your software up to date. Not just your antivirus, but keep all your software up to date. And there's a tool, I don't have any affiliation with any of these companies, but there's a tool I personally like called Secunia PSI, because it checks to see your browser plugins are up to date, your Office tools are up to date, your Instant Message Pro, everything's up to date. So if you're on a PC, I don't know if they have one for Mac or not offhand, but check it out. Your hard drive will crash, or your laptop will be stolen or lost. I've had both these problems, right? So these are things that are going to happen, and so you should prepare for them. Back up your computer, back up your servers, right? Pretty straightforward. There's some nice software, like Crash Plan, Carbonite, Mosey, that backs up your stuff to the cloud. It's encrypted, really easy to use, not expensive. You will get emails that try to defraud or infect you. even with spam filtering in place, you're still going to get these emails. All of those phishing examples we showed, primarily the way they drive potential victims to those sites is through emails. So don't open emails that you're not expecting. And one thing we really advise, particularly businesses, is to have your CFO, your controller, whoever's accessing bank accounts online, sending wires, that sort of thing, either use a Mac because there's less malware created for them, use a dedicated PC, or if your finance person is a little bit more technical and your organization is technical, you can use a virtual machine on their system, other things like that. But your finance people are being targeted, barraged every day by emails like that Federal Reserve email, by emails, fake emails spoofing payroll companies, fake emails from banks. We see fake Better Business Bureau complaints, all sorts of things. And so their computers are going to get infected. So you don't want them doing online banking from the same computer system that they're getting all these emails on. There's cases of small businesses going out of business, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars when they get infected with malware. The other thing that's kind of interesting that we didn't talk about earlier is that one of the shifts in computer crime is that the attacks are primarily what we call social engineering attacks these days, where they're confidence scams. They're sending emails that pretend to be something that they're not, and they rely on the user to take action. In the past, a higher number of attacks were really based on technical tricks, using software bugs, worms, things like the Melissa virus, the I Love You virus, SQL Slammer, things like that. It still happens, but generally speaking, the way that most people get infected today is because they help the attackers. They clicked on the link, they opened the email, something like that. Online services that you use will be hacked. So your Facebook account will be hacked, or your LinkedIn account will be hacked, or your Twitter account will be hacked. Cloud services that you use will be hacked. Not any fault of your own, but those companies will slip up somewhere. Some of them will. There was a recent case where a database of encrypted LinkedIn passwords was uploaded to a Russian hacking bulletin board system. Right? So what can we do, right? So the first thing is don't use the same password on the same systems. What happens, right, is if these guys get into, break into a social networking company, they steal all the usernames and passwords, then they'll go try those same usernames and passwords on bank websites, on other websites, right? And nowadays, most sites, what's your username? Your email address, right? And then the other thing that happens is companies are getting a lot better about encrypting passwords, but if the hackers get the encrypted database, what they'll do is they'll generate a list of what's called plain text passwords, or the passwords, and then they'll encrypt them and then just see where they match in that database, right? So really your password strength is not just how complex it is. If it's complex, that makes it harder to guess. But nowadays, hackers aren't guessing passwords, they're trying to generate your password and match the encrypted version. So what makes it more difficult to match is by having it be longer, right? Because they're going to start out, do all the 1-character passwords, all the 2-character passwords, all the 3-character passwords. They'll do some variations on that where they use words plus one digit, or words plus one symbol. But so it's still good to have complexity in passwords, but equally important is to have a long password. So I typically use phrases, like a sentence of 5 or 6, short words, throw in a few digits or some punctuation. And that way, if your company you're doing business with has their encrypted password stolen, the bad guys aren't going to be able to figure out what it is. So we're going to kind of sum things up, and then we'll open it up to questions. There's actually, the audience is more technical than I was expecting, so I'm happy to talk about anything anyone has questions about. So the cybersecurity incidents are rarely as bad as the media would have you believe. That's the first thing, right? DOR was hacked. I read one case where someone thought their identity was stolen. related to that. I don't know if I believe it or not, but the reality is, especially in these large breaches, the bad guys have so many stolen usernames and passwords, they have so many credit cards that they can't use them all. And so the likelihood they're going to use yours is actually small because of that. It's kind of perhaps counterintuitive, and I don't know that gives us any more peace that there's a lot more things stolen, but statistically they're less likely to use yours, which is good news. Internet's overwhelmingly out to get you. This is true in the sense that there are tons of threats out there. Most websites are secure, but there's more spam email out there than there is legitimate email. We just talked about this a little bit, but most threats today have a social engineering element. They require the user to do something for the attack to be successful. So we really have to be vigilant about that. It's not completely futile to try to train users, but don't rely on that. When you're evaluating your risk, try to avoid the security psychology traps, right? And it may be appropriate that we're going to implement countermeasures that cost more than the real statistical risk because of the moral outrage. But just be explicit. We're doing this because in the extreme unlikelihood that this even happens, there's going to be moral outrage. It's going to put us out of business. And then implement the tips we just went over. It's where you're going to get the most bang for the buck to protect yourself, your business, and your customers. Thank you. Any questions?
You must have been good. No questions?
Everyone can leave and know everything they need to know about security. All right.
I just wanted to add something that's really been helpful for me is LastPass, which is the browser plugin that generates random passwords for you and then remembers them.
Yeah, there's some applications like that. There's other ones that will store all your passwords in a secure system. I think none of those things are foolproof, but I think it's better than many of the alternatives or kind of the default behavior.
Thank you, John. Appreciate you coming out today. And presentation and recording will be online on the Friday site, so if you guys want to go back and look at some of the points that John's raised. And delighted to have John next door at Flagship 2. And he's busting at the seams now with 24 employees. It's amazing the ride from 2 to 24 in a couple of years. And congratulate your success and appreciate you trying to keep us a little safer. Couple of housekeeping things. I'd actually like to take a minute to welcome John Park, who's visiting from Boston.
Hi.
He's thinking about relocating his wife, and I guess, I don't know that you have kids, I didn't get that far.
2-year-old son, Henry.
Yeah.
That's
So
over
he's
here,
thinking,
I guess, but I guess.
thinking about locating down, and he's in the creative space, and John, I mean, I've just been crazy busy, so but one of the things that, and this is kind of nice, right, so when you get professionals to visit town, so John says I'm willing to basically hang out for a day at the Flagship, and any of the companies who want to just consult with me on creative strategy, happy to do it for the day, that kind of thing. And so unfortunately, we just got busy, went overseas for a while, didn't get a chance to kind of send everybody a note, but happy here, and I'd like to spend a few minutes, after this. But I appreciate you guys coming out. We haven't set the next topic because sometimes I've got to pull back and get into mundane things like we're all trying to figure out what the new Obamacare and insurance means. And I've got a couple of guys that are pinging me to try and do that. And so we might actually switch gears from technical talks back into business talk. And it doesn't matter to some of the big companies, but to some of the smaller guys, it could be an issue. So that possibly is going to be the topic for July. But I appreciate you coming out, and thank you again, John. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.